Hello and welcome to a special edition, I think of it as a special edition of the Town Meeting Talk Show, because today we are going to visit with retired Police Chief Mike Hicks. He has been a fixture for many, many years here in Cordova in various roles and capacities. Just retired on June 30th, and he and Mayor Koplin and myself had a good conversation a couple of days ago. You might have heard a snippet of it yesterday during our daily briefings, because fortunately nothing was on fire regarding COVID response, so we were able to shift our focus a bit. Anyway, that was a piece of the program you're going to hear today, and this show is brought to you by Cordova Wireless Communications. They are your local cell phone provider, and they provide your local talk show. So we hope you'll sit back and relax, grab a donut. Hey, it's a show about a police chief. You need to have a donut and some coffee.
And we'll look back, look at now, look forward with retired Police Chief Mike Hicks, our special guest on the Town Meeting Talk Show. And now a quick message to our YouTube listeners. I forgot that YouTube hates it if you use an excerpt of a song, so we have to remove the excerpt of the song, because if YouTube isn't happy, then nobody is happy. Now let's resume. Chief Hicks, you are officially retiring. Well, actually, you have retired at this point from the police force. I mean, how does that feel after trying to and then not and then
ending up there?
That feels pretty good today. Yeah, I'm still tying up loose ends, but yeah, it's kind of a nice place to be finally.
Well, and you've, you have served both as a police and fire chief. Is that a somewhat unusual responsibility for a person to take on, or does it happen more in the state than we might realize?
I don't know. I think it's kind of unique. I started with the fire department years ago when I was still in the Coast Guard, and then as I moved up through the ranks at the police department, I just moved up through the ranks in the fire department and kind of worked both sides of it for many years now, and it seems to have worked out for the most part.
So what has been the length of your tenure in this type of public service for Cordova?
I got here in '89, retired from the Coast Guard in 1995, started with the city in '96 as a dispatcher, worked my way up through the ranks to police officer, became a police officer in '99, left the department in 2007 to go to work for the Alaska Wildlife Troopers. They put me right back here as a wildlife trooper for 7 years. And then in 2014, I came back as the chief until yesterday, for almost 6 years, 5 years, 11 months.
And when you say yesterday, we're talking about June 30th. So now you said you arrived in 1989. That was an interesting year to show up. What was that like coming into the middle of all that with the spill?
Yeah, I was in the Coast Guard. I was stationed in Kodiak from 86 to 89 and had the assignment already. I've already been assigned to come to Cordova before the spill, and walked into the middle of it, and it was quite interesting. It was a very educational. I walked into what turned out to be at the time, Cordova was the largest air station in the Coast Guard. We had over 17 aircraft. We had people from all different branches of service, and it was quite interesting.
I can imagine. I mean, we showed up in about 92, and it was still, of course, very raw at that point. So, like I say, to have walked right into the middle of the event itself. So, is it what have been some of the highlights, I guess, during your time as chief, maybe specifically police chief?
Okay, yeah, a lot has happened. Shortly after I was hired as a police chief, we had two fatal drug overdoses here in town. So one of my goals then was to get a good drug detection canine and a canine handler. Well, almost immediately, Native Village VX stepped up and offered up $10,000 as a grant toward the purchase of a drug detection canine. It took a few years. June of last year, the legislature had some other grants for crime prevention. I was able to get another $15,000 from them. So between the two, we ended up with $25,000 and purchased just a canine, and Officer Cameron Hayden, he's the handler. The outstanding officer. We sent him up for 6 weeks of training in Fairbanks with the canine, and they're back now. And we have a fully qualified officer in canine, and we've named the canine EAC as a thank you to honor the native village of EAC for being the first ones to step up to offer up money for the program. So that was a big accomplishment in my mind. Yeah, I mean, that's just one of several different things that we had happened here over the years.
Sure. Well, and of course now we're in a period where being on a police force is very interesting, which is something we want to get into in a little while here. But first off, you were initially going to step away, and then COVID happened. How did that sort of fall into place where you changed your mind there kind of midway?
Yeah, I was, we've been in the works for a while that I was going to retire May 1st. And then this thing happened. I was actually up in Anchorage on business up there when it all started in March. When I came back, the city manager and Paul Trumbley approached me and asked me if I'd stick around to help out, because I've had years of experience in training in the incident command structure, and I teach it and things like that. So I said, well, heck, I'm not going anywhere, so I'll stick around. And it's been a very, very rewarding experience there to see the group of people we've got working on this from all walks of life in the community and on the team have done an outstanding job getting us where we are today. There were some bumps in the road, but we worked our way through them, and everybody's got a really strong team in place. We have some great folks, and always have had great talent in this community.
Yeah, well, and that's something that Mayor Koplin has discussed with me frequently on our radio programming, and how you were a stabilizing force at a time that was obviously very chaotic. You know, I spoke with Joni Behrens a few times. She was instrumental, along with yourself, along with Dick Groff and other people, in preparing Cordova for emergency response. And for all the planning that you try to do, there are always going to be surprises. Something that she told me about that hadn't been considered as much as in hindsight she would have liked to have seen, is preparing for this potential of not being able to get together for face-to-face meetings. The fact that all the meetings had to be done over teleconference or computer or something like that, you lose a lot of the nuance in conversation. Did you find that challenging and somewhat unexpected?
That was very challenging, because the way the system's set up, you have face-to-face meetings and several meetings. We had to kind of morph things into a combined meeting where everybody had their input and come out with a consensus at the end of the meeting. And then throughout the week, between meetings, or throughout the days, because we were having daily meetings early on, we would go home and ponder things, and we'd bring it to the table the next day, and we'd tweak things a little bit, and what can we do better here or there? And as we progressed, I've always been kind of the person that once you get things stabilized, you try to look at the whole situation over and say, okay, how can we make our situation better? And we've done that periodically throughout the process, and we are far and away ahead of many other communities in the state and around the country right now. I mean, the lower 48, we started having a mask rule early, which was not really popular with some folks, and I get it, but we made it pretty much voluntary, and most people are trying to do the right thing. And now you look at the lower 48, they're having these 18,000 person outbreaks, and they're fighting over masks and this and that. So we've been there for months, and it's a really nice thing to see that we only have 4 cases here in our community, because folks have generally tried to do the right thing, and with everybody that's worked on this, we've got some really good strategies and plans in place, and I think that's what's made it so successful so far.
Well, and two, the partnership between you guys on the IMT and the processors, listening to suggestions, coming up with ideas, them coming up with very aggressive plans, because obviously they were going to be the largest potential source of carriers from out of state. And again, it seems very much like it's working. And Mayor Koplin, I mean, this has been a continuing thing that you've heard from people up the chain. You and I have talked about this a lot. The fact that Cordova in many ways is serving as a model for the state at least, and who knows where else as a result of the chatting with the Senators Murkowski and Dan Sullivan, right?
Well, exactly. And, for better or for worse, the Copper River salmon fishery, we promoted it for decades as, the first big salmon run and the cachet of being the first and then the high quality. So there's a lot of eyes on this fishery, and it was kind of the tip of the spear this year where the pandemic was concerned, because as we got closer and closer to our salmon openers, they started having outbreaks in meat packing plants. And of course, at the national level, food security and food supply lines were a big concern. And, in a situation like Cordova's, where half of your population is suddenly transient processing workers and fishermen from all over the country, and in many cases all over the world, and then working and living in very tight quarters, it was just a recipe for an absolute disaster. So there was a lot of concern. But with that also came some resources. And the more they looked at Cordova and how we were working our way through the issues, the more they applauded the approaches. And it really became more of a partnership than an outreach at the state and federal level. And as they saw what we were doing, and we've had a lot of conversations since. A lot of times it's the state or federal government reaching out to us to see what we're doing and how it's going. And at the incident management team level and with our medical team.
Well, again, it's a great testament to the planning and the people involved. Now, Chief, as you mentioned, and I'm still going to call you Chief because even if you retire, once a chief, always a chief. So this mask rule has been interesting the way that it's evolved across the country. To talk about being, part of the team that technically is tasked with enforcing that. We do have a rule on the books, and yet your approach to it, as you've discussed it in council meetings, has not been, that we're going to apply this with a club. We're going to apply this with common sense. So speak to your philosophy of how that has been enforced.
You're right, absolutely. Most folks are trying to do the right thing, and generally speaking, if you ask folks to do something voluntarily, they're more apt to comply, I guess, for lack of a better word, to get the end result than to be heavy-handed. And we haven't had to write any citations. We've had a real important part of the mask rule has been our ambassadors passing out masks, passing out information. Just like anything else, officer presence is your first level of force or compliance. You see an officer when you're driving down the road. There's a police officer behind you. You're more likely to use your turn signal. Police officer shows up, at a scene, and people tend to take notice. So folks have been trying to do the right thing, and so it's been really easy to keep this thing moving. And we would only write a citation for somebody who's really being blatant. They're totally disregarding the.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting. I was going to ask you how many people have been cited. You said you haven't had to do that with anyone. Now, of course, there have been factions that have said there should be more, that the enforcement and the punishment should be more aggressive. What's your response when you're confronted with somebody from that camp?
Yeah, it's difficult. Sometimes we do what we can do with what we have for personnel. Of course, we've had a real issue as they have all across the country with trying to employ police officers and keep them here. So when you're short-staffed, we have to prioritize things as they come and deal with the calls that we can. And again, like I say, most of the time we've asked somebody to, hey, could you please wear your mask? And, I forgot, or I didn't know there was a rule, and they generally comply. So we haven't had to be heavy-handed at all. I think everybody is really trying hard to get through this the best we can, and that's been a big help, the support from the community going along with the program, so to speak.
Yeah, well, and again, it seems, judging from the numbers, it seems like it's been very successful so far, and continuing on that track hopefully would enable us to stay that successful. Aside from masks, anything else, any other interesting observations from you being on the team? I mean, if we were to sort of think of it in terms of what you would want to leave what would you want to make sure the community keeps doing in terms of response?
Pretty much the same thing they have. Wear your masks, wash your hands, keep your distance. And then going back to the team and the police department team as well. We worked hard over the last several years to get other sources of funding for training for the officers and dispatch staff to make them better, and that has paid off. When things like this happen, this is just another problem that they handle problems all the time, and they handle them very well. It's just a new problem, and they have to kind of figure it out, and they've got the abilities to do that because of their previous training. And, Sarah Catherine over at NVE as well, a big shout out to her during my tenure. She has been working hard on Department of Justice grants for training and equipment through NVE. Many thousands of dollars she's provided for police training within the community here. And she's been working hard to set up the diversionary court through NVE, the tribal court, which gives some of our young folks and adults an option to not have to go through the legal system and not have a criminal record for some minor offenses that we didn't have that before. She came along and she's worked tirelessly for that. It's a real plus for the community. And
it sounds like you're very supportive of that idea.
Oh, absolutely. Other communities, Anchorage and bigger communities, have had similar programs in use for years. And like, for example, if we had a minor that had an alcohol-related incident, the only option they had in Cordova was to go through the state system and end up with something on their record versus like Anchorage, they had, I think it was called a peer court, where it was a group of young people where your judge, jury, and executioner, so to speak. But they would the minors would go through that. They would hand down their punishment, and if they followed the requirements of that, they had no criminal record or nothing on their record, which is something that we've needed here for a long time. Not that we have that much of it, but at least it gives our young folks an option to not have something on their record when they make a really minor mistake as a teenager, as we all have.
Well, that's interesting because it sounds like the kind of innovative thinking that, through this national growth pain or whatever we want to use to refer to it, upheaval is by no means an understatement. The innovative ideas like that, there again, you look at something that we do well in Alaska and in Cordova that could conceivably apply other places as a piece of maybe rethinking how policing works. Before we go into, the kind of looking forward part, though, Mayor, I want to turn back to you briefly. Anything that, as this is unfolded, that you want to add?
Actually, it just reminded me of something that Police Chief Hicks had brought years ago. We had a young person who was engaged in a little bit of vandalism locally, and so it was structured so that they could basically make some reparation. And so they came to the company I was working at the time, and I thought, what this young person is doing is trying to express themselves, and they were painting some things they should have been painting, and so trying to turn it. I could see that Chief Hicks was trying to turn it into something positive, and I kind of took that hand off and ran with it, and had a long conversation with him about trying to focus your energy on things that benefit your community instead of maybe detracting from it. And I don't know if that made a big turning point in that young person's life, but I know that they thought about it as they were doing their hours of community service and doing something positive. And then later they got into a technical program and got their degree and went on to a pretty productive work job. And I never saw any negative outcomes, or I didn't see that negative path work playing itself out. And that just kind of, I think, is a perfect window into Chief Hicks' service. It's not so much, like you said, the club approach, but the carrot approach of what's the positive behaviors we're looking for, how can we support that, and give people opportunity to do the right thing. And frankly, that's, you and I have talked about this. Cordova was ranked the safest community in the state. Those kind of things don't happen by accident. It's leadership, and that leadership has been Chief Hicks. So that's why that.
Well, so as we move forward now, Chief, what happens in the short term as you step away? Who kind of takes over?
Nate Taylor, one of our officers, he's been on the force for probably about 10 years now. He's applied for the position. He's the interim, and we'll have to see where it goes, I'm sure. It's not going to be my decision. If it were, he would be my choice. Because I know him, and he has a lot of the same philosophies as I do. He'd be a good fit. He's committed to the community, and that's what we need. So, yeah, hopefully it'll work out well for him. And, I'll be kind of in the shadows, and I'm there. I'm as far away as the phone and willing to offer advice and assistance where I can. I'm not going away completely. I'll be around for a while yet.
Well, that's good to know. And so you feel like, because we've heard some of the things that Clay have said, that you have described, the overall way Cordova seems to tend to respond to things, which is in some ways being ahead of the curve when it comes to public safety. I mean, we have the advantage of being a small, isolated community, so everybody really knows everybody. But so you feel like, these types of situations of trying to come up with innovative ways to deal with things rather than, quote unquote, the standard system, that Nate understands that and is going to be eager to continue that in whatever leadership he's doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've always been forward-thinking, or I've always been forward-thinking, and it's kind of carried over to the rest of the department. We started about 5 years ago now, teaching active shooter safety in the schools, and I've taught from kindergarten all the way to grade 12, and every year I go into the schools. This last year it was kind of a bust because we were so short-handed, but we go into the schools. I've gone to other parts of the community and businesses and taught, and one of the ones that was a real good takeaway from that is we have a thing that's called the sleeve that the kids put on the door in the school if they have to lock themselves down in the room. It's a thing that slips over the door closure. Well, back in a couple of years ago, it was on September 10th, where you kind of look for things to happen and bad things happen. We had a report of somebody approaching the school that was maybe going to do some harm to the kids at the school. It turned out they were never in any danger, but they did what they were supposed to. Both schools and the hospital went into lockdown. And the next day we had a meeting with the parents and concerned citizens and question and answer period. And what came out of that meeting was that one of the parents was running around in the school not knowing what to do in the chaos. And one of the second graders says, "Come in here, we know what to do." Pretty much called the parent into the room. She couldn't figure out how to lock the door. And the child was able to show her the sleeve, and she lifted the child up. The child put the sleeve on the door and secured the room. That was a second grader who learned that in first grade. And the school system's taken it to heart, and they train and continually do what needs to be done to make our kids safe. And that was a huge success for me in my mind with all the years of doing this. They knew the right thing to do, and they did it.
Boy, mine too. I mean, what a great story. Well, now let's kind of look ahead. You talked about having a community meeting, and actually, it looks like some meetings are maybe going to be coming soon. As we said before, this is obviously a very thought-provoking time across the country regarding policing. So, how is our local department responding to all of that, and what is the plan to address this within Cordova?
We're fortunate. We don't really have the problems that they do in a lot of places in the lower 48. We've got a very diverse community. We have people that come in from all over the world, all times of the year, summer and winter, with the folks skiing and stuff like that. So we're really fortunate. We see a lot of this stuff. We do our best to educate ourselves, and like you say, we're forward thinking. The big thing now is, one of the big things coming out of the lower 48 is, the chokehold. Police aren't allowed to do those. We stopped doing that a while ago. We've all been trained in it, and it's more so to be able to recognize if a bad person's trying to do that to me, that I can recognize it and use my defense tactics to to save myself. But we don't do things like that. We treat everybody we deal with dignity and respect. And I've always expected that out of all my folks, whether it be dispatcher or an officer. And I think that's going to continue because of their training and experience and leadership under Officer Taylor.
Okay, so do you know much about plans for having some meetings or engaging in some dialogue on some of these issues that are being raised nationally, or is that something that we should maybe visit with Officer Taylor about a little later?
Yeah, I haven't heard of anything coming up, but I do know that there's, I do know in the future there's going to be trainings available around the state, seminars, things like that for officers to attend, and we always seek those out. And if we can get the grant money and the funding, we try to bring them here, or do what we can to get those. And so we've been watching that pretty closely to see what's coming down the pike, because there's going to be changes, and we look at our own policies and procedures. We're constantly validating and revalidating them. So we're in good shape here, and I think we're going to continue to be. But there may be some meetings coming down the pike, but I haven't heard.
Mayor Koplin, how about you? Have you heard of any plans to address some of these issues that are being raised nationally at the local level?
Well, I think Chief Hicks said it well earlier. We really don't have these issues at our level. However, with a change in leadership here, and Nate starting as a chief, and with a new city manager, and with some of the lessons we've learned through the pandemic, and then with the city council commitment and concern, I guess, for staffing our public safety. I know it's a very competitive environment out there, and very often it's hard to attract talent to a small community where maybe your compensation isn't at a same market point. But Cordova has a lot to offer, and I know in my business here in town, if you do good things and you're in a place where people want to be, it makes it easier. So as we kind of do look ahead towards maybe some town hall type discussions about what does Cordova expect of our public safety system and how can we support it, I think that we can be in a really good place here. As I was listening to Officer Hicks talk about their work with the schools, that's a great recruiting tool. Those children have a very positive perspective of quote-unquote law enforcement, as we've come to call it, but really what they're seeing, the protect and serve side. And, that's a great calling card when our officers, public safety officers, are facing so many complex and dangerous challenges in their work environment these days. And now some of this national conversation calling, their work and commitment into question. I think it's something that Cordova actually has to offer, is a safe place where they can actually live and work and raise their families in safety. And so I think it'll be a good conversation. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see how it evolves. Mayor, while we've got you, any final reflections on the work that you've seen Chief Hicks doing?
No, except I've learned a lot from it, and this pandemic has really been a roller coaster. We've seen it at the national level, not so much at the local level, because, like you said, he's been a calming influence, and then with his deep understanding of how the incident management system is supposed to work, he's kind of been able to train us on the job as we walk through this. And certainly going to miss his physical presence, but I know he's, like you said, no more than a phone call away, and I hope to be sampling some of his smoked cheeses and some pictures of him with a fishing rod in his hand.
That's great. Well, and Chief, are you going to, you said you'd maybe take a little time away, but are going to continue to live in Cordova at least for a while? Is that the plan?
Yeah, we're going to be here through the winter. We've got a place down in Michigan we've had for a while, and we bought another home down there that my wife actually hasn't seen yet. We bought it in December, so she's kind of anxious to get down there at some point. But yeah, we're going to be here, and then we plan on coming back to visit in the future. Because Cordova's been a great place to live, and a lot of thanks to the community for all the support over the years, and we're going to miss it.
Yeah, well, I mean, you and just about everybody that's ever commanded a Coast Guard vessel, from the sound of things, just even if it's over a matter of 2 years, just love being here and what the community has to offer, and very often seriously consider coming back. So, any final thoughts? As we kind of wrap this up, Chief? I mean, what do you really want to leave us with here?
Just thanks for everybody for the support all the years, and I was pretty blown away yesterday by the surprise party they threw for me. That was pretty awesome, and everybody if we stick together as a community through anything over the years, anytime we've had a problem, the community always comes together, and that's one of the things I love about Cordova. We have our differences, but when bad things happen, people check their egos at the door, and we all go to work and roll up our sleeves and get the job done, and that's really commendable. The community should be very, very proud of that.
Well, in a community like very few, if any others, really, certainly not any other that I've experienced, and you've been a very meaningful part of it, Chief, and thank you so much for your service in all of the ways that you've served, and no doubt have made a lot of lives better, and thanks for letting us
share in the celebration with you here. Thank you, J.R., and thank you for all the stuff you've done over the years, too, promoting the community and getting the word out there when we need it. You've always done a really good job. I appreciate that. Well, you make it real easy. Mayor Koplin, thank you for being with us, too. Yeah, thank you. And now a quick message to our YouTube listeners. I forgot that YouTube hates it if you use an excerpt of a song, so we have to remove the excerpt of the song, because if YouTube isn't happy, then nobody is happy. Now let's resume. Okay, again, a big thanks to Chief Hicks for joining us
on today's edition of Town Meeting, along with Mayor Koplin. Hope you enjoyed hearing that conversation. Of course, it'll go on our website, as our talk shows do. Not website per se, but our YouTube channel, which you can access through our website. But if you want to go right directly to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Cordova TV. Glad you could listen in with us. A big thanks to Cordova Wireless Communications, the cell phone and wireless data provider that keeps the dollars in Cordova, particularly important in challenging economic times. I'm J.R. Lewis, glad to have been your host. The remainder of your 10 a.m. hour special programming will be coming up. Thanks again to Chief Hicks for his service. And everybody have a great 4th of July weekend.